Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, for our intents and purposes today, Tuesday, September 23rd, 2025. I am called away from the microphone live for today's holiday, the Rosh Hashanah holiday. And I've been saying for a couple of days, I know this has been coming up, and I have some long reads and backgrounders that I thought I might share with you. We're going to take that opportunity to do that today. One of the things I've been talking about in the lead up to this is that there was, I thought, a rash of Stephen Miller profiles out there, and I still think that I'm missing one or another of them. But as it turns out, I had two of them stashed away in Instapaper. But it turns out that one of them was basically a news report on the fact that another one of these things had been done. And I think covering the bases of what's in this rather long read profile over in Rolling Stone, which, as I recall from social media pronouncements, Aswin Subsang was saying would be his last for Rolling Stone before moving over to another outlet. Which one? I don't remember. Look at the profile. You know how it is with journalists these days and your ability to continue to follow them no matter where they move to. But I also had put aside this thing from the Independent, the UK Independent, basically based on the headline. But yeah, it turns out to be mostly a review of what's in the Rolling Stone article. So we'll just read that and move on to other long lost backgrounders and other long reads that I've been holding on to for one reason or another. And you can see what the attraction was. Gop staff on Capitol Hill, this headline reads, hated Stephen Miller so much, they spread rumors he likes playing with dolls, report says. Well, I was a little bit curious about that, but mostly curious about the, hey, Capitol Hill staff hated him so much. This is an important part of the profile, I think, on Stephen Miller. He's just kind of universally reviled, but I guess now also feared because he's essentially the acting president. And while Trump, walks off into the sunset for golfing on the weekends, he can pretty much shape policy as he sees fit, dispatching who knows what assets on behalf of supposedly the United States government, up to and including, as we recall, that he has in, what was it exactly? One of the discussions, I think, in Signal Gate over when and where United States Air Force assets and other air power assets were going to be used to effect a strike. Was it in Yemen at the time? And all the problems involved with A, leaking that information, and B, proving your tacticalness by telling everybody exactly what assets would be in use and where they would be at certain times, which is incredibly dangerous. But part of the discussion even then that didn't really get the attention it was due, I think, was that at some point there was some question like, are we sure that the president wants us to effectuate this raid? And Stephen Miller basically saying, yeah, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've heard him say, yeah, we want to do that. And that was like good enough to launch a raid. Stephen Miller says the president said to do it. Now, it's difficult to convince yourself that the president would have been staunchly opposed to it. No, by all means, stay away from that international law and all that. I want to tread lightly. Now, probably not. But it was an issue that came up at some point. Like, hey, should we be letting Stephen Miller speak for the president on this? Is this enough? Anyway, I find that interesting. Plus, of course, this weird background that, basically since anyone has documented anything about Stephen Miller from his high school days on forward, he was just kind of a misfit and universally reviled. And I guess maybe this is where the part of the revenge agenda from Donald Trump comes from. Donald Trump is certainly personally attuned to revenge as an agenda himself, but he's also been matched up with a policy-making partner here who has his own motive for revenge. Anyway, I thought I might read to you from Rolling Stone, Inside Stephen Miller's Reign of Terror. Everything you loathe or love about Donald Trump's America, you hate or cherish about Miller's Republic of Fear. And as I mentioned on the byline here, Aswin Subsang, but also Nikki McCann Ramirez, Andrew Perez, and with a very interesting illustration here by Victor, is it Juhaz? I don't know how you pronounce your last name, Victor. Juhaszz. Apologies, but I'm really enjoying the illustration. It features, let's see, Stephen Miller there scowling at not the camera, but at the viewer, with Kristi Noem in costume looking over her shoulder. I don't know who this is supposed to be, this guy looking over her shoulder. There's Pam Bondi over there as well. It's a good one. It's dated September 14th, 2025, and we'd better get underway if we hope to fit it in. It was after 3 a.m. on November 6th last year, and nobody on the planet was happier than a balding slender man, standing near the reception desk at the Hilton West Palm Beach. Donald Trump had just finished hosting his 2024 election watch party at the adjacent Florida Convention Center, declaring victory in a speech eloquently touting the most incredible political thing. Jubilant Republican donors, campaign staff, future government officials, and attendees, of course, John Voight, flooded over to the luxury hotel to celebrate. I expressed some surprise here, just that the whole event wasn't at Pervalago, but I guess too many people even to be held there, so they actually had to rent an outside venue. That's amazing. I wonder if he got a kickback. At the front of the lobby stood Stephen Miller, the man Trump would soon tap as his White House's undisputed orchestrator of policies and executive authority. Miller had been one of the first Trump administration's key policy drivers, particularly when it came to the president's throttling of illegal immigration. Legal immigration. Pardon me. Yes, he made it, under the excuse that he was throttling illegal immigration, he throttled legal immigration. Senior officials in President Joe Biden's administration will tell you the country is still living with the damage Miller did to immigration during Trump's first term, and that the Biden team was unable or unwilling to undo much of it with their 4 years of power. But that night in Florida, something was different for the then 39-year-old Miller. A universe of possibilities was unfurling before him. Amid the revelry, Miller huddled with other high-ranking Trump personnel and said his thank yous to the ad hoc procession of euphoric conservative voters and Gop bigwigs who congratulated him over and over. They could all see it wasn't just Trump's victory that night, it was Miller's, and many felt obliged to kiss his Trump-endowed ring. To see the expression of unbridled joy written across Miller's face at that moment of Trump's restoration was to stare into the eyes of someone who could see the future. Trump's top advisor, his most faithful believer, the one close aide who had somehow survived the countless purges of MAGA officials in the first term, knew the country was now his. Speaking to one overjoyed woman, Miller said, "It's gonna be great." More than 7 months into Trump's second term, Stephen Miller has become America's, if not the world's, most powerful unelected bureaucrat. And remember how much we hated those? Remember, unelected bureaucrats? Boo, we don't like those. With Trump's blessing, Miller has been allowed to run and remake the country in a manner virtually unheard of for a U.S. government official of his rank. Think of any egregious policy from the Trump administration. Chances are it was driven by Stephen Miller. It almost sounds like you're a conspiracy nut if you actually list the things he's had a hand in coordinating. All of it bears Trump's signature, but the president is not the one spending his nights writing executive orders and bending legal theory to his will. Nearly all of this bears the authorship, or at least co-authorship, of Miller. Everything you loathe or love about Donald Trump's America, you hate or cherish about Stephen Miller's Republic of Fear. As it turns out, that is the case. Under Miller's guiding hand, the government can deport, parenthetically, or kidnap and rendition, you or your spouse without due process to a foreign gulag if the president feels like it. The White House can repeatedly threaten to take away the most basic of constitutional protections, such as habeas corpus. The president can launch Justice Department criminal investigations against his enemies, who, by all known accounts, did nothing wrong except annoy the commander-in-chief or refuse to help him steal an election. The president and his lieutenants can arrest you at a routine courthouse check-in, at your church, outside your kid's school, even if you have no criminal record. They've instituted a heavily draconian system of immigration arrest quotas, ensuring a regime not mainly of mass deportations, but of mass disappearances and indefinite detention in jails and newly erected camps. I think they probably meant not merely of mass deportation, but it does say mainly. Okay. They've quickly turned much of federal law enforcement into the masked, nameless, unaccountable secret police, working at the whims of the president and his staff. The president can deploy armed National Guard troops and even U.S. Marines to the streets of an American city anytime he wants and deem it enemy territory. The administration has made censoring media organizations, comedians, and aging rock stars a policy priority. And this was before the Jimmy Kimmel thing. This was written in an anti-free speech crusade waged from the West Wing to the Federal Communications Commission. And then some, I don't know what's here, some italicized quotes. I guess other people's descriptions of who Miller is and what role he serves. Shadow SecDef, Secretary of Defense, now Secretary of War. SecWar, I guess you could say. Prime Minister Miller, the real Attorney General, the DHS boss, President Miller. Trump administration officials and other Republicans close to the president and this White House are paranoid that Miller will one day hear them gossiping about him behind his back. But they still whisper the unofficial titles and nicknames that they bestow onto the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, and that's all he is. When Rolling Stone asks one senior administration official about former Fox News star and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, this source says, unprompted, that, quote, he does what Stephen wants him to do. Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell says that Hegseth enjoys a great working relationship with Stephen Miller. They are completely aligned on carrying out President Trump's America First agenda. Well, okay. The next section has a subtitle. One intense, we'll say, MFer, but they spell it out. As a teenager in Santa Monica, California, Miller craved nothing more than triggering the good-looking kids in school who wanted nothing to do with him. Jason Islas, you tell me whether it's pronounced in the Spanish style or not, Islas. But Jason, who first met Miller at Lincoln Middle School in Santa Monica, says he and Miller and a third friend were a tight-knit band of outsiders who spent middle school doing preteen boy stuff, like talking about Star Trek. He remembers Miller as being a big Captain Kirk fan. That all changed, though, in the summer of 1999, between 8th and 9th grades. That's just amazing how much younger Miller is. When Islas says Miller informed him they couldn't be friends anymore. One of the things he did say was that he didn't like the fact that I'm of Latin heritage. Islas, I guess we'll now say, recalls. In the decades that followed, Miller did not grow except to become more hardened in his extremist views. When he worked as a communications aide in the office of Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions, who himself was a victim of one of the purges, during the Obama years, he was so widely disliked by his conservative colleagues on Capitol Hill that Republican staff and other offices would invent or spread malicious rumors about Miller, such as that he liked to play with porcelain dolls. I don't know where that came from, but this is offered parenthetically. A White House official insists that any such characterization of his time on the Hill is inaccurate and baseless gossip. The staffers at the time never dreamed that he'd amount to much more than a punchline or an obscure cautionary tale of what happens when you read too many far-right hate websites and dive into Washington's most feverish swamps. Even today, not much has changed. As the president's policy architect and enforcer, he is obsessed, according to 3 Trump advisors, with deploying the might of the government to stamp out what he deems anti-white hatred and anti-white racism and anti-white discrimination, no matter the cost. Never mind that the real Nazis out there don't consider Miller to be white, but okay. Miller speaks almost exclusively in apocalyptic terms, except they're actually apocalyptic. I just didn't choose to pronounce it correctly. They told me I could say either one. Okay, Miller speaks almost exclusively in apocalyptic terms, in the caricatured, and Greg's favored pronunciation here, language of military combat, forever war, and invasion against the culture and the homeland. He's yearned to erect a vast, hyper-militarized network of what he's dubbed camps for detention and mass deportation, a network he hopes will change the American political and physical landscape forever. Miller, who you may note is Jewish, has been denounced by his own uncle as a one-man betrayal of Jewish moral and political values. Miller has long held the deepest admiration for the Immigration Act of 1924 and wishes to bring America back to those days. The law is notorious for making the Holocaust deadlier for Jews who tried to flee the Nazis only to be denied safe passage to the U.S. Oh, well, what can you do? Immediately after election night 2024 was called, human rights groups and pro-immigration advocates could not help but consider that they were not prepared for the onrush that Miller was about to unleash. Of all the Trump appointees, he was the one who kept them up at night. For all of incoming Trump border czar Tom Homan's big talk about mass deportations, he was nothing compared to Miller. To those familiar with Homan's work, the former acting director, what kind of director? Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, could recognize occasionally that there were some rules and restrictions here and there. For a guy like Miller, the only laws that mattered were the ones he and Trump could pervert. And he loves the word pervert. Miller may be the avatar of the anonymous racist internet troll brought to agonizing life and imbued with power. But that does not mean he doesn't thoroughly believe in the righteousness of the ideology he's selling. In his mind, he's the triumphant hero, a one-man antidote to effete liberalism and a holy warrior against the permissive legal and illegal immigration that has left him and his peers feeling mugged by pluralistic reality. Talk to Republicans operating at the highest levels of Trumpville, and you get a unique mix of admiration and unease when you ask them what they think about Miller. One intense MFer, a longtime Trump advisor notes. Even attempts by his friends to make him sound gentler, kindler, or funnier often fall flat, making him seem like a crank or the meanest dork you've ever met. For instance, multiple longtime Miller associates say that the top White House aide is one of the most maha people you'll ever meet, and has plunged headlong into Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s style food and health, or anti-health, agitprop. Accounts of his social life make him sound, to put it gently, tedious. One conversational victim of his recounts to Rolling Stone what it was like to get hit on by a premarital Miller circa 2017 at a bar not far from DuPont Circle. The story involves being grilled about which country was named on the collar of her clothing. Don't say China. And getting accused of being a globalist because she wasn't the right kind of conservative. Had a way to hit on her. You bet. That'll work. Negging, though. He probably thought it would. Female strangers aren't the only ones in Washington who think he's weird. Over the years of their close working relationship, President Trump, ever the gossipy mean girl with a nuclear arsenal, has not shied away from insulting Miller behind his back. According to 2 sources with direct knowledge of the matter, Trump has commented to others in the past about Miller's intense, awkward and at times off-putting demeanor. But to Trump, Miller is a useful battering ram, the policy answer to his lingering questions of where's my Roy Cohn? Stephen Miller has been one of President Trump's longest-serving and most trusted advisors for nearly a decade, and I can personally attest to the respect the president has for Stephen because I witness it every day, says White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. That's why Stephen serves as a deputy chief of staff for policy and homeland security advisor, because the president has the utmost faith in him and his proven leadership abilities. In addition to being extremely effective at his jobs, Stephen is a loyal colleague and friend. Any suggestion otherwise is false gossip from people who don't actually know him. Okay, there goes the garbage. In addition to the press secretary's statement, the Trump White House sent Rolling Stone a lengthy list of testimonials resembling an extremely MAGA LinkedIn endorsements section from Republican lawmakers to prove that people like Stephen Miller personally. Senator Josh Hawley, for instance, says he's glad to call Miller a friend, noting or adding that he cares deeply about helping create a future where American families can thrive. Stephen Miller is bright, thoughtful, takes the time to listen to our members and their concerns, and has always been easy to work with, says House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, adding, I am proud to call Stephen Miller a close friend. The White House provided similar statements from Senator Tom Cotton, Senator Mike Lee, Representative Jim Jordan, with a spokesperson saying that they expected that all the lawmakers' praise for Miller would be included in this story. Or else you're doomed. But, Get it done is the next section title. Nowadays, according to various sources working in and close to the Trump West Wing, the president's lieutenant is technically a deputy White House chief of staff, but he far outpaces the actual White House chief of staff, Trump's former 2024 campaign co-chief Susie Wiles, as Trump's primary chief of administration policy. Miller touches virtually every policy and executive action, especially as it relates to domestic initiatives, effectively all documents, Trump directives, constitutionally dubious orders, and memos. The architecture of Trump's military crackdowns in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and coming to a Democratic-dominant city near you is in part a product of Miller's vision for dominating liberal strongholds he despises. It's a blast for Stephen, says another fellow Trump advisor in describing Miller's role in orchestrating the domestic deployments of U.S. armed forces. The Trump administration's sweeping clampdown on diversity programs, higher education, and free speech Trump does not care for is a direct expression of Miller's ethos, bringing to life a long-held ambition of federalizing the conservative culture war in ways once thought uncouth. Trump's sprawling immigration and border enforcement is just the Stephen Miller Show, brought to you by Stephen Miller Productions, LLC, and personally stage managed by Stephen Miller. With each shred of paper that the president will sign to launch these domestic programs, the Trump lieutenant peruses it, sometimes marks it up with edits, and pushes other Trump officials across the federal apparatus to, in his words, get it done. His berating of intra-departmental and agency officials has become the stuff of legend, if not waking nightmares. Since the beginning of the second Trump administration, two sources who've worked in the federal government have personally dealt with Miller, tell Rolling Stone that his berating has made them each cry at work. During interagency discussions, Miller has routinely name-called, yelled, threatened officials' jobs or future in the party, and attempted to humiliate people in front of their colleagues. He becomes enraged if he feels the immigrant arrest numbers aren't padded enough, or if he believes Trump's domestic agenda is being stalled even slightly. He's known for working long hours and micromanaging the brutal policies coming out of the new administration. He has a long-standing reputation dating back to 2017 in the Republican upper ranks as someone willing to say anything, do anything, and betray almost anyone in the service of Trump, and more vitally, keep his power and proximity to the president intact. I'm just curious about all the tough guys in this administration and whether there's anybody of the bent of someone like Steve Bessent or Besant, or whatever the hell we're calling them these days, and why there are no people who are inclined to just punch them in the face and see where the chips may fall. But I guess they're worried about that ahead of time. Maybe with good reason. Within the highest levels of the Trump administration, the idea that Attorney General Pam Bondi runs the Justice Department or that Kristi Noem runs the Department of Homeland Security is woefully incomplete. Nominally independent departments are run by the West Wing of the White House and therefore largely by Miller. When some government personnel would note that Trump can deploy the National Guard troops and armed U.S. Marines to Democratic-run urban areas, but that the troops can't conduct traditional law enforcement per se, Miller was the one telling administration lawyers and staff that Trump wanted them to figure out ways around that legal inconvenience and to report back with whatever legal theories they'd produce. Miller has made it a top priority for the opening months of this Trump term to normalize the deployment of U.S. troops on American soil, not for states of emergency, but for domestic political purposes. According to those who've spoken with him about it, Trump and Miller view those who object as weak, cowards, and pro-crime. The next section here is entitled, it's from a quote, I guess, "We just have to follow orders." But we are, of course, coming up on our first break of the day, and perhaps we'll save the bulk of this section for afterwards, but just to give you a taste of what's to come here. In the aftermath of Trump's deployment of the National Guard and U.S. Marines to assist with ICE operations in Los Angeles, Miller insisted that purging undocumented migrants from the city would create a utopia for the remaining residents. And then he goes on to list a number of benefits, supposedly, that will come from all of this. We'll share them with you on the other side of this break. They are, of course, insane and out of this world. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. What show was it again? You tell me. You remember where you're listening to? Kagro in the Morning Show. Wow. Okay. Well, what can I tell you? The fatigue is getting to me. We left off saying we were just starting a new section here. We just have to follow orders. A new subsection in the Rolling Stone profile of the disgusting hot mess that is Stephen Miller. And we were reminded that it was Miller's claim that they were essentially going to create a utopia in Los Angeles once they, got rid of all the people that he didn't like. What sort of things was he promising? Yeah, here's the quote to Fox News. You have any idea how many resources will be opened up for Americans when the illegals are gone? Miller told Fox News. No more waiting in line in an emergency room. Good luck with that one. No more massive traffic in Los Angeles. Your health insurance premiums go down. Your public school classroom size will shrink. And if you do need to get support from the government, you're not going to be in line behind millions of illegal aliens from the third world. This is going to be such a gift to the quality of life of everyday Americans, minus the reign of terror. In July, when speaking to the press pool in front of the White House, Miller was asked if it was the best use of the administration's resources to be going after moms with young kids. Decent question. In return, he grilled the reporter on what percentage of undocumented migrants should be allowed to stay. Do you think we have some sort of magic 8-ball to see which particular illegal aliens are going to go on to commit a rape or murder? Well, I guess you think you would, since you're predicting it with such certainty, but I guess not. He just means any of them could. They all did. What the hell's the difference? Why wait? Miller has no legal background, but according to Trump officials, Miller was the mastermind behind Trump's ploy to use the Alien Enemies Act to conduct mass deportations without due process. No wonder. A plot he detailed in 2023 during an interview with conservative radio hosts Clay Travis and Buck Sexton, whoever the hell they are. Miller was also the first member of the administration to publicly suggest the suspension of habeas corpus. Just suggest it. Why not? The core constitutional right of protection from arbitrary detention by the state. Speaking to reporters at the White House in May, Miller said, they're not naming the months after him, not yet. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that is an option we're actively looking at. There is, of course, no invasion. For those who want to grasp the true nature of Miller's legacy and his role in our world, you have to look far beyond 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. To understand Trump's principal enforcer, you need to understand what he is doing to countless people all over the country, and then you'd have to understand his personal, instinctive response when he hears about the stories of his victims. Across the country, there are thousands of families ripped apart by the Trump-Miller gang, and most of these stories you won't read about or may never hear about. One of these was relayed earlier this year to Rolling Stone by an Ohio-based immigration lawyer. This magazine verified details of this account and agreed to use pseudonyms for the wife, husband, and 3-year-old daughter. The lawyer asked not to be identified too, due to Miller's and the Trump administration's zeal for targeting pro bono immigration attorneys. But really, we now know their zeal for targeting anybody who speaks out in the newspaper against them. As we heard last week when I mentioned to you that I've seen reports that journalists seeking comment on their developing stories from the White House are confronted with demands for identification of everyone else who's spoken on or off the record in the story. We just want to know who we're being asked to, respond to here. But really, they want to round up the people who they're having to respond to. In 2020, in this story, Richard, as we'll call him, fled his Latin American home country to seek asylum in the U.S. As Richard will tell you, he had served in the military in his home country, but had grown fearful of what might happen to him if he remained, citing corruption and powerful organized crime. By 2025, he had already made a life for himself in the United States. He had a wife, Ellen, they'll call her here, and a small daughter, Jessica, and they were living in Columbus, Ohio. He worked to support the family, and Ellen stayed home with Jessica. There is no known history of petty or violent crime or any criminal record between them. However, in early 2024, the couple showed up for one of their scheduled hearings and left without actually attending it, but only because somebody at the check-in desk erroneously told them they were not on the schedule that day. That one mishap, which by all accounts was not their fault, was enough to doom their family under Trump's second administration. This past June, Richard received a text message from ICE asking that he appear for a check-in at the local ICE office. Due to the Trump administration's barrage of new policies and arrest quotas pushed by Miller and Trump, his lawyer was suspicious. Still, Richard had faith in this great country. He wanted to show he was no criminal, that he wanted to come here the right way, and that he had nothing to hide. The Ohio-based attorney met the family of 3 at the federal check-in outside of Columbus, with all of them waiting in line to get into the building. Jessica and Ellen were wearing matching attire. Jessica's hair in pigtails with ribbons, wearing a pink dress. The lawyer recalls the daughter and the father laughing as Jessica played with her dad's cheeks, which he blew up as if to mimic a puffer fish. After they passed the waiting area, 2 armed ICE officers would soon flank them, and one of them told the attorney and the family that the officers had no choice. ICE had its directive, quote, from Washington, the officer said, which had been issued after Trump's inauguration in January, new standards and demands for higher arrest and deportation numbers, regardless of any existing criminal record, that were directly authored by Miller. No lawyer, by Miller. The officer said they had to put the father in handcuffs right then and there and take him away. We just have to follow orders, the ICE officer said. That usually works. At first, the Spanish-speaking family did not know what was happening. The lawyer had to translate all of this back and forth as the couple and their legal representative pleaded with ICE officers to allow them to self-deport as a family. Surely doing so would save the American taxpayer money. The ICE officer apologized. There was nothing anyone apparently could do. The officers were courteous enough to offer to allow Ellen and Jessica to leave the room so the child did not have to see them handcuffing her dad, although usually the cruelty is the point. The father squatted low to pick up Jessica and hug her goodbye. Jessica, confused and sobbing, would not let go, wrapping her arms around her father's neck and her legs around his body. One of the 2 ICE officers informed the family they needed to get things moving along just as Ellen had her hands around Jessica's waist, unable at first to pry the school-age girl off her dad. One ICE officer had his hand on the father's shoulder while the other officer hovered over the family. "Daddy!" the girl screamed in Spanish. "I want daddy! I want my daddy!" Ellen was finally able to remove a hysterical Jessica from the room, and as the ICE officers took Richard, she kept yelling, "Daddy! Daddy! No!" As they walked back to the waiting room, the lawyer could see the faces of the immigrants and the others who were sitting in the waiting area, looking on in confused horror at what must have been waiting for them on the other side of that door. Months later, the attorney tells Rolling Stone, "I can still hear the little girl's screams." Ellen and Jessica would pack up and leave for Richard's home country. The 2 expected to reunite there with him within days. Instead, to their terror, the Trump administration disappeared him into a Louisiana detention facility for nearly 2 months. They have since been reunited, but the scars have yet to heal. The lawyer says that Jessica still wakes up in the middle of the night, shouting for daddy. Under every modern president, there is harsh immigration enforcement and heartbreaking decisions are made, but this story is only happening because the Trump White House and Miller are leaning on agencies to crack down in every state just so Miller can run up the scoreboard on arrests. To you, this may seem sad, even appalling. To Miller, he thinks your outrage is very funny. In private conversations this year, the top Trump advisor has said that liberals promoting immigrant families' sob stories are engaging in emotional blackmail that Miller and the government simply will not fall for. He laughs it off before getting back to work, creating more horror stories. That's it. We actually made it to the end of this one. Wasn't quite as long as I thought, but quite revealing, and many more stories. I'm pretty convinced there are more stories just like this out there about Miller, but maybe one is enough for the time being. There's certainly more that we need to get to, and we might as well use the day to do it. Well, upon further review, it seems like that may have been the only one of what I thought was a rash of profiles on Stephen Miller of late. There are certainly some older ones we could go back to, which may be parked back in the old pocket. But at any rate, I think that brings you up to date on what's been written about him recently and just reminds you that he's out there and what a malevolent force he is. Maybe we can catch up on a couple of names and maybe introduce a few more on a day like today away from the microphone that you should be keeping an eye on. There's a piece I put away from ProPublica, released back on September 8th, which I thought was of some interest. A look back at what happened at the Social Security Administration when the dodgy boys invaded the place and Leland Dudek stepped forward to take control of the place. as a remade MAGA disciple, though that was apparently not where he originally came from. How about this interesting profile of the dynamics of that takeover? The untold saga of what happened when DOGE stormed Social Security by Eli Hager. Again, a September 8th piece for ProPublica. And here's how it goes. On February 10th, on the third floor of the Social Security Administration's Baltimore area headquarters, Leland Dudek, you remember him? Unfurled a 4-foot wide roll of paper that extended to 20 feet in length. It was a visual guide that the agency had kept for years to explain Social Security's many technological systems and processes. The paper was covered in flow charts, arrows, and texts so minuscule you almost needed a magnifying glass to read it. Dudek called it Social Security's Dead Sea Scroll. Dudek and a fellow Social Security Administration bureaucrat taped the scroll across the wall of a windowless executive office. This was where a team from the new Department of Government Efficiency was going to set up shop. DOGE was already terrifying the federal bureaucracy with the prospect of mass job loss and intrusions into previously sacrosanct databases. Still, Dudek and a handful of his tech-oriented colleagues were hopeful. If any agency needed a dose of efficiency, it was theirs. There was a kind of excitement, actually, a longtime top agency official said. I'd spent 29 years trying to use technology and data in ways that the agency would never get around to. The Social Security Administration is 90 years old. Even today, thousands of its physical records are stored in former limestone mines in Missouri and Pennsylvania. Its core software dates back to the early 1980s, and only a few programmers remain who understand the intricacies of its more than 60 million lines of code. The agency has been talking about switching from paper Social Security cards to electronic ones for 2 decades without making it happen. DOGE, billed as a squad of crack technologists, seemed perfectly designed to overcome such obstacles, and its young members were initially inquisitive about how Social Security worked and what most needed fixing. Several times over those first few days, Akash Boba, a 21-year-old coder who'd been the first of them to arrive, held his face close to Dudek's scroll, tracing connections between the agency's venerable IT systems with his index finger. Boba asked, "Who would know about this part of the architecture?" Before long, though, he and the other Dodgies buried their heads in their laptops and plugged in their headphones. Their senior leaders had already written out goals on a whiteboard. At the top, find fraud. Quickly. Dudek's scroll was forgotten. The heavy paper started to unpeel from the wall, and it eventually sagged to the floor. It only got worse from there, said Dudek, who would, improbably, be named acting commissioner. Oh, we have a chance to use our sound effects. They named the acting commissioner of the Social Security Administration, a position he held through May. In 15 hours of interviews with ProPublica, Dudek described the chaos of working with DOGE and how he tried first to collaborate and then, he says, to protect the agency, resulting in turns that were at various times alarming, confounding, and tragicomic. DOGE, he said, began acting like, quote, a bunch of people who didn't know what they were doing. Well, they were that. With ideas of how the government should run, thinking it would work like a McDonald's or a bank, and screaming all the time. The shock troops of DOGE at the Social Security Administration and myriad other federal agencies were the advance guard in perhaps the most dramatic transformation of the U.S. government since the New Deal. And despite the highly public departure of DOGE's leader, Elon Musk, that campaign continues today. Key DOGE team members have transitioned to permanent jobs at the SSA, including as the agency's top technology officials. The 19-year-old whose self-anointed moniker, Big Balls, has made him one of the most memorable DOGE-ers, joined the agency this summer. The DOGE philosophy has been embraced by the SSA's commissioner, Frank Bisignano, if I've got that right, who cares, who was confirmed by the Senate this May. Your bias has to be because mine is, that DOGE is helping make things better, Bisignano told senior officials weeks after replacing Dudek, according to a recording obtained by ProPublica. It may not feel that way, but don't believe everything you read. In a statement, a Social Security Administration spokesperson said that Bisignano had made, quote, notable initial progress, and that, quote, the initiatives underway will continue to strengthen service delivery and enhance the integrity and efficiency of our systems. The statement asserted that under President Trump's leadership and his commitment to protect and preserve Social Security, Commissioner Bisignano is strengthening Social Security and the programs it provides for Americans now and in the future. For all the controversy DOGE has generated, its time at the Social Security Administration has not amounted to looming Armageddon, as some Democrats warn. What it's been, as much as anything, is a missed opportunity, according to interviews with more than 35 current or recently departed Social Security officials and staff who spoke on the condition of anonymity, mostly out of fear of retaliation by the Trump administration, and a review of hundreds of pages of internal documents, emails, and court records. The DOGE team and Bisignano have prioritized scoring quick wins that allow them to post triumphant tweets and press releases, especially in the early months, about an essentially non-existent form of fraud, while squandering the chance for systemic change at an agency that genuinely needs it. They could have worked to modernize Social Security's legacy software, the current and former staffers say. They could have tried to streamline the stupefying volume of documentation that many Social Security beneficiaries have to provide. They could have built search tools to help staff navigate the agency's 60,000 pages of policies. New hires, it says parenthetically, often need at least 3 years to master the nuances of even one type of case. They could have done something about wait times for disability claims and appeals, which often take over a year. They did none of these things. Ultimately, no one had a more complete view of the missed opportunity than Lee Dudek, a 48-year-old with a shaved pate and a broad build that suggests an aging former linebacker. Dudek is a figure seemingly native to the universe of President Donald Trump, an unlikely holder of a key post, elevated after little or no vetting, who briefly attains notoriety in Washington circles before vanishing into obscurity, not unlike Anthony Scaramucci in the first Trump administration. Dudek, a mid-level bureaucrat with blunt confidence and a preference for his own ideas, had failed in his one past attempt to manage a small team within the SSA, leading him and his supervisors to conclude he shouldn't oversee others. Despite that, Trump made him the boss of 57,500 people as acting commissioner of the agency this spring. Dudek got the job, wittingly or not, through an end run around his bosses. After Trump won the 2024 election and rumors of a cost-cutting and efficiency SWAT team began to swirl, Dudek asked people he knew at big tech companies for introductions to potential DOGE members. In December, a contact set him up with Musk's right-hand man, Steve Davis, which led to conversations with other DOGE figures about how they could hack Social Security's bureaucracy to get to yes, Dudek said. By February, Dudek had become the conduit between DOGE and the SSA, alerting top agency officials that DOGE wanted to work at headquarters. And unlike Michelle King, the other acting agency chief at this time, the Dudek was willing to speed up the new hire training process to give DOGE access to virtually all of the SSA's databases. This precipitated a sequence of events that began with him being placed on administrative leave, where he wrote a LinkedIn post that propelled him into the public eye for the first time. I confess, he posted, I helped DOGE understand SSA. I confess, I circumvented the chain of command to connect DOGE with the people who get stuff done. That same weekend, King resigned, and Dudek, who was at home in his underwear watching MSNBC, got an email stating that the President of the United States had appointed him commissioner. Between February and May, when Dudek's tenure ended, his erratic rhetoric and decisions routinely made front-page news. He was often portrayed as a dodgy patsy, perhaps even a fool. But in his interviews, that's the way we remember him. But in his interviews with ProPublica this summer, he revealed himself to be a much more complex figure, a disappointed believer in Dodge's potential who maintains he did what he could to protect Social Security's mission under duress. I don't know if I'm buying it, but it's an interesting story. Dudek is the first agency head to speak in detail on the record about what it is like to be thrust into such an important position under Trump. He told ProPublica that he decided to speak because he wishes that those who govern would have more frank and honest conversations with the public. To the 73 million Americans whose financial lives depend on the viability of Social Security, those first months were a seesaw of apprehension and rumor. Inside the agency, Dudek, ill-prepared for leadership or for Dodge's murky agenda, was stumbling through the chaos, in part by creating some of his own. Dudek knows what it's like to depend on Social Security. When he was a kid in Saginaw, Michigan, his mother turned to Social Security disability benefits to support him and his siblings after she got injured at a Ford-affiliated parts factory. She also had a mental health breakdown. Dudek's now deceased father, who worked for General Motors, was alternately abusive and absent, according to the family. At school, Dudek was isolated and bullied for being poor, his sister told ProPublica, and he's had an underdog's quick temper ever since. But he was always an advanced student, and he developed an early interest in computer science and politics. As a teenager, he often watched C-SPAN. It's a sign of illness, but okay. He was fascinated, he said, by how government worked and how it could change people's lives. Dudek arrived in Washington in 1995 to attend Catholic University of America. He was the type of earnest young man who was enthralled by President Bill Clinton's campaign at the time to reinvent government by injecting it with private sector style efficiency, much as Trump and Dodge later said they would. In college, he also displayed the tendency to buck authority that would mark his professional career. He had a night job running the university's computer labs. If there were problems, he was supposed to call his boss. He wasn't supposed to install new software on all the computers, but that's what he did. It worked, although he got a talking to about knowing his role. After graduating, Dudek spent nearly a decade working for tech companies that contracted with the federal government on modernization projects before migrating to several jobs within federal agencies themselves. In 2009, he arrived at the Social Security Administration as an IT security official. The agency was just like the Saginaw he'd run from, Dudek said, an insular, hidebound place where everyone knew everyone and they all thought innovation would cost them their jobs. But the SSA wasn't the only institution at fault. Congress had enacted Byzantine eligibility requirements for disability and supplemental security income benefits, forcing the agency to expend huge amounts of time and money running those programs. At the same time, lawmakers had capped the agency's administrative funding just as tens of millions of baby boomers were aging into retirement, exploding Social Security's roles. The SSA is now at its lowest staffing level in half a century, even as it's taken on more than 40 million new beneficiaries. Because of the SSA's stultifying culture, Dudek said, he leaned into his insubordinate streak. He had the sense that he could do it better, and when he felt like his proposals weren't receiving money or attention, he went around his superiors. In one instance, he approached potential partners at credit card companies, hoping they would like his ideas for combating fraud and would relay those ideas to the Social Security Commissioner at the time. Certainly from an internal perspective within SSA, certainly from a congressional perspective, I was violating rules, Dudek said. In part because of moves like this, Dudek got reassigned within the agency several times. Over the years, he was given multiple roles as a, quote, senior advisor. A title, he said, is for federal employees who are either incompetent but too established to fire, or highly competent in a technical way but lacking in management or people skills. Dudek was stubborn. He could come off as a know-it-all, and he tended to ramble when speaking, but he's also thoughtful and well-read. In our interviews, he brought up everything from the origins of the concept of Social Security among sociologists and psychologists in the Depression era to the bureaucrats who were left behind in faraway places after the decline of the British Empire. He repeatedly cited James Q. Wilson's seminal 1989 book, Bureaucracy, which spills considerable ink on the inefficiencies of the Social Security Administration, and on a businessman named Donald J. Trump, who supposedly knew how to cut through red tape to get building projects done. No such law constrained Trump, Wilson wrote, but little did he know that there was no law that constrained Trump. Dudek had been a lifelong Democrat and voted for Kamala Harris, but like some other liberals, he was becoming exasperated with the administrative state and special interest groups, including corporations, unions, and social justice organizations that, quote, capture government and stifle reform. If it took Trump to cut through that, Dudek was open-minded. The world has changed, he scribbled in a note to himself. We must change with it. Immediately after Dudek became commissioner in February, he got a call from Scott Coulter, a hedge fund manager with a $12 million Manhattan apartment who'd been picked to lead Dodge's team at Social Security. We're coming, Coulter said. Be prepared. Dodge arrived ready to embark on a specific mission. Its operatives at the Treasury Department had seen data suggesting that the Social Security Administration wasn't keeping its death records up to date. They thought they saw signs of fraudulent payments. Musk was very, very interested. Dudek wasn't initially concerned about this focus, which he and his colleagues viewed as misguided. To him, the young coders were nerdy outsiders, just like he'd once been, albeit ones from privileged Ivy League and Silicon Valley backgrounds. They reminded me of myself when I first got into computers, he said. He thought he could mold them. In particular, Dudek liked Baba, who had a gentle air and a thick pile of dark hair that covered his forehead. Dudek had spent hours with Baba, trying to get him to focus on concrete problems like how beneficiaries' records were stored, often as cumbersome PDF and image files. Instead, Baba, who did not respond to a request for comment, prioritized Musk's requests. His quest, in fact, to prove that dead people were receiving Social Security benefits. Baba had completed high school in New Jersey just 3.5 years earlier. As a class speaker at his graduation, he'd encouraged his classmates not to ignore nuance and complexity. He'd lamented the increasing willingness to simplify even the most complex narratives into sensational tidbits like 280-character tweets, which perpetuates misinformation. Yet, Dudek had barely settled in as commissioner when Baba unintentionally sparked a national information firestorm himself. We'll wait until after the break to bring you the details on that. You may remember it from happening at the time. How interesting to have progressed from someone this careful and delicate with nuance and complexity into what unwittingly triggering a firestorm. Find out more after this. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We left off. I had to break it off a little bit early because nothing was going to fit at this point. But so what was the misinformation firestorm that Akash Baba accidentally, unwittingly triggered inside DOGE and the Social Security Administration? It was a table that he created, which had appeared as a screenshot in a grossly misleading Musk tweet about vampires, it said. Vampires over the age of 100, allegedly collecting Social Security checks. Boba had sorted people with a Social Security number by age and found more than 12 million over 120 years old still listed in the agency's data. Boba said, though, he knew these people weren't actually alive and receiving, I say add alive, but weren't actually receiving benefits, and tried to tell Musk so, to no avail, according to SSA officials. Dudek, he says now, watched in horror as Trump then shared the same statistics with both houses of Congress and a national television audience, claiming the numbers proved, quote, shocking levels of incompetence and probable fraud in the Social Security program for our seniors. The White House declined to comment on this episode. Bisignano, the new SSA commissioner, has repeatedly said that, quote, the work DOGE did was 100% accurate. Inside the SSA, the DOGE team tried to find proof of the fraud that Musk and Trump had proclaimed. And now everything has moved around on the screen. Here we go. But it didn't seem to know how to go about it, jumping from tactic to tactic. It was a maelstrom of topic A to topic G to topic C to topic Q, said a senior SSA official who was in the room. Were we still helping anything by explaining stuff, the official said. It really wasn't clear by that point. Dudek began to realize the problem wasn't primarily the people he called the dodgy kids. It was the senior leaders who were issuing orders without heeding what the young dodgers were learning. I have a feeling it was a two-way street, though. Dudek was perhaps the most favorably disposed to the outsiders. Plenty of agency officials were already put off by the dodgers. I know, I'm making it up as I go along, dodgy, but they say dodge. I'm saying dogers, but dodgers. Plenty of agency officials were already put off by the dodgers, who often issued peremptory orders to meet with them and answer questions. Michelle Kowalski, an analyst who has since departed the agency, was instructed to take one of the dodgy people, Cole Killian, through earnings data and historical records to analyze the cases of extremely old people whose deaths had not been recorded in Social Security data. She found herself having to explain to him again and again that many of these people were born before states reported births and deaths to the federal government and decades before the advent of electronic record keeping. In the early days of the agency, some people didn't even know their birthdays. Kowalski had assumed that Killian was middle-aged since he was issuing instructions to her team, but he usually kept his camera turned off during video meetings. When he finally turned it on for one call, the face she saw seemed like that of a teenager. Killian was actually 24, just 6 years removed from performing Hotel California at his high school talent show in Cambridge, Ringe, and Latin School outside of Boston. Is that right? Ringe? Okay. Sure. Killian, whose dodgy responsibilities also involved work at the Environmental Protection Agency, did not respond to a request for comment from ProPublica. Kowalski was exasperated by having to answer to such inexperience, even as so many of her colleagues were being pushed out the door by the Trump administration. She was not alone. Many of us had actually believed in the marketed idea of genius technologists coming in to make things work better, one senior SSA official said, but DOGE ended up being more interested, the official said, in trying to prove that the Social Security Administration was entirely incompetent than in suggesting improvements. Employees at headquarters took their time walking past the glass-walled conference room where DOGE staffers had set up, glaring in at them as they worked among the stacks of laptops that they used for assignments at different agencies. In a blog popular among SSA staffers, the mood in the comments section turned dark, with some anonymous posters identifying where in the building the incel DOGE boys were located and saying that they are just warming up. Just think what will come next. Dudek sensed the growing tension. He felt it too. He'd been getting anonymous death threats mailed to his house. He decided to move the DOGE operatives to a more secluded area of the campus and assigned an armed security detail to protect them. During his first month as commissioner, Dudek ran his executive meetings in bombastic fashion, as if he were Trump on The Apprentice. And he sent out insulting full-staff emails pressuring career employees to retire. Some 5,500 have left, with 1,500 more expected to follow. Dudek says this behavior stemmed partly from being in over his head, amazed by who he suddenly was answering to. When the President of the United States asks you to do stuff, he said, you get caught up. But he also claims he was just performing a role. Early on, I put on a persona of a yeller, Dudek said. Multiple longtime colleagues and friends noticed the change, they told ProPublica. As one put it, there's Lee, and then there's Leland performing Dudek. I'm not even sure which one is the one they're talking about. But anyway, this, he hoped, would convince the White House and DOGE of his commitment, which could in turn give him credibility as he kept trying to push them toward the real issues at Social Security. I see. But the Trump administration kept having other plans. Its demands usually came through Coulter, the DOGE lead with the Harvard and hedge fund background, who early on dropped by Dudek's office unannounced multiple times a week, Dudek said. I really think it would be helpful if you were to do this tomorrow, Coulter would say to Dudek about eliminating an entire division of the SSA or cutting more staff, according to Dudek. To him, these suggestions felt like orders. If he responded, I don't know, let me think about it, Coulter would call a few hours later on the encrypted messaging app Signal to ask, you really aren't catching on, are you? And do you know how many times I've defended you? I was supposed to get the message, and it would be my own decision, so I'd be stuck with it, Dudek said. He can say he never told me to do anything. Coulter, he can, I guess, say he never told me to do anything. Coulter, who has been working for DOGE at NASA in recent months, did not respond to a request for comment. One of Coulter's suggestions involved the SSA's Office of Transformation, which had been doing the seemingly DOGE-like work of developing an online application to replace many of the agency's paper-based forms and in-person interviews. The office had been working with the elderly, low-income, and disabled people to see what most confused them about SSA processes and what would most help them if they were redesigned. But instead of facilitating this effort at greater efficiency, Coulter told Dudek to close the office, according to Dudek, claiming it was wasteful. Agency staff joked that DOGE shut it down because its name included a word that began with trans. Get it? Right? Transformation. Dudek and his colleagues sometimes attempted to co-opt DOGE's obsessions in the hope that they could address a genuine problem at the agency. This strategy was not successful. Such was the case with the issue of phone fraud. I think we remember this one. Knowing that Dodgers would perk up at the mention of anything fraud-related, Dudek and other officials made a point of explaining that they'd been working on an initiative to block bots that had been calling the agency. The bots would impersonate beneficiaries using dates of birth and other information that can be found on the internet to try to change the beneficiary's bank routing information and steal their benefits. In 2024, Dudek had been on a team that spearheaded an effort to combat this type of fraud. The plans included running all phone-based requests for bank account changes against a Treasury Department database of suspicious accounts and analyzing such calls to verify whether they were being made from the vicinity of the address on file of the person purportedly calling. DOGE ignored that proposed solution. Instead, the White House instructed Dudek to end all claims and direct deposit transactions by phone. Beneficiaries would have to verify their own identities by using an often confusing web portal or traveling to a field office to do it in person. For millions of elderly or disabled people, these were daunting or impossible options. When this policy was rolled out at the end of March, beneficiaries panicked. Many flocked to field offices to preemptively provide proof of their identities, even when they didn't need to. Back at headquarters in a weekly staff meeting, Dudek asked who could jump on the increasingly urgent task of making it easier to schedule field office appointments via the SSA website. "Well, Lee, you just fired that team," one official answered, referring to the Office of Transformation. Dudek said he asked this question on purpose to make sure DOGE heard the answer. I mean, maybe, but I don't know. Over the course of 6 weeks under Dudek, the phone policy zigged and zagged a half dozen times. For example, the SSA adopted, then abandoned, a 3-day waiting period to conduct an algorithmic fraud check on all calls before finally ending up nearly where it began. Transactions could be carried out by phone again. Throughout this saga, Dudek was still getting calls from White House officials, most often from Katie Miller, DOGE's spokesperson and ostensibly the wife of Stephen Miller, one of Trump's closest advisors. You heard about him earlier. Katie Miller went on to work for Musk before announcing plans to launch her own podcast. Seems like a natural progression. She did not respond to a request for comment. Miller often called well into the evening, Dudek said, to chastise him about anything the press had reported that day that had caught the administration off guard. As Dudek restored the phone policy to its pre-Trump version, Miller got angrier. "You changed the president's policy," she said, according to Dudek. I'm like, "No, I'm still with the president's policy," Dudek told Miller. "But if Social Security officials could implement the anti-fraud measures that he and his team had previously been planning," he said, "they could achieve the same end. In that case," Dudek said, "we will do so and ease the friction point on the public." "How dare you," Miller said. How dare you what? Ease the burden on the public? Probably. But, waver at all from the president's plan, I'm sure. Increasingly dismayed, Dudek hatched a plan that seemed to embody his mix of good intentions, maybe, hubris, and melodrama. He decided he would continue to play along with DOGE on the surface, in part so that Coulter and the other bigwigs would think he was still handling their business and thus spend less time at the agency. The younger DOGE team members, he said, were easier to work with when their masters weren't around. But behind the scenes, he began to undermine DOGE however he could. Sometimes he did this by making intemperate statements that he knew would find their way into the press and draw attention to what DOGE was asking him to do. "Have you ever worked with someone who's manic depressive?" he said of the Trump administration's leadership in one meeting. Other times, Dudek himself was the leaker. As commissioner, he was often an anonymous source for articles in the Washington Post and the New York Times. If it was stupid stuff from the DOGE team, a lot of times I would go out to the press and immediately tattletale on myself so that it would blow up the next day, Dudek said, adding that he did this in part to help Social Security advocates understand and bring attention to the growing crisis at the agency. Again, a big maybe on that one. Rebecca Vallis, CEO of the nonprofit National Academy of Social Insurance, said she was in a one-on-one meeting with Dudek in March when he started getting calls from DOGE officials and the media. The calls were about his recent public comments claiming he might have to shut down the entire Social Security Administration if a federal judge continued to deny DOGE access to sensitive Social Security data. "He just let me sit there with the volume up high," Vallis said. On one of the calls, she said, someone told Dudek, "Elon loved that, but now it's time to walk it back." Afterward, Dudek told her, "I don't know how we get out of this without hurting huge numbers of people. I'm just trying to give advocates some ammunition." Dudek's strategy was easier to pull off without DOGE catching on if it came off as the blundering of an amateur, he told ProPublica. This guy may be overthinking things. In the most striking example, DOGE instructed Dudek to cancel 2 contracts that the SSA had with the state of Maine, according to Dudek and other SSA officials. I think you might remember this story too. The contracts, which all 50 states have long had versions of, allowed Maine to automatically report births and deaths to Social Security. Thereby, by the way, avoiding the so-called vampire problem, but never mind all of that. Canceling them would impede government efficiency. Births and deaths in the state would take weeks or months longer to enter into the federal system. That would likely cause benefits to continue to be sent to thousands of Mainers after they died, which was exactly the kind of thing that Trump and Musk had been railing against. It seemed clear to Dudek that he was being told to do this only because Trump was publicly feuding with Maine's governor about transgender athletes, of which there are like 6, but okay. The White House declined to comment on this episode. So he decided to write the hell out of an email directing that the contracts be canceled. He did so in a way that he thought would still earn him points with Trump and DOGE, but that would simultaneously be so inflammatory that it would create a major storyline for reporters, advocates, and Congress. Please cancel the contracts, Dudek's email read. While our improper payments will go up and fraudsters may compromise identities, no money will go from the public trust to a petulant child. That last phrase referred to Maine's governor, Janet Mills, the one Trump had been fighting with. Parenthetically, do I care about Janet Mills? No, Dudek told ProPublica. As Dudek had hoped, the press attention he generated compelled him to do what he already wanted to do, reinstate the contracts. In a written apology, he explained that he was only belatedly realizing the potential harm of what he alone had done. I screwed up, he told reporters. I'm new at this job. Once again, Miller called Dudek and excoriated him. What the hell is going on? She said. This place leaks like a sieve, he answered. What can I tell you? Big maybes, but starting to become interesting. If so, malicious overcompliance? So is that, or do they just say malicious compliance? I don't know. Anyway, not certain that's what he was doing. It's a hell of an explanation, though. And he didn't strike me as the kind of person smart enough to come up with this retroactively. I mean, maybe he is, but it didn't strike me that way for the limited exposure I had to him in the newspaper. Looking back on his tenure, Dudek maintains that his 3 months working alongside DOGE were not as harmful as they could have been, especially compared with what happened this spring at other federal agencies, some of which were essentially vaporized. Social Security checks, he points out, are still going out the door. Still, the SSA is reduced in his wake, with thousands fewer staff members to process claims and improve systems. These departed employees were disproportionately experienced and knowledgeable. They were the ones able to get other jobs or retire with a pension. They took a lot of know-how with them. And the emotional harm that DOGE caused to older people and to people with disabilities, worsened by Dudek's confusing actions, lingers. Many of these people have had money taken out of their paychecks their entire careers to pay for something more than just retirement benefits, security. It's a feeling that may now be lost to them forever. Indeed, DOGE and Dudek caused so much consternation about the stability of the system that hundreds of thousands of people have filed for early retirement in recent months, even though doing so is not financially wise in the long term. The SSA must now pay out more in benefits than expected, contrary to DOGE's cost-saving mission. Dudek's sister, back in Saginaw, Anna Dudek, relies on Social Security disability benefits herself. I would talk to my brother when he was commissioner and be like, dude, the decisions you're making are causing people to feel terror, she said. Terror is an apt descriptor. She calls her brother Dudek dude. How do you like that? I mean, probably just because dude, but that's wild. Okay. Dudek acknowledges much of this. I'm not a cold, callous son of a bitch. I really do get it, he said. I'll forever be associated with the pain of DOGE, but so much went on in such a short amount of time, I tried to make the best decisions I could given the circumstances. Since being dismissed from the agency in June, Dudek has been struggling to find another job. My name is Mud, he said. It's as if I no longer exist. As a former SSA colleague put it, Dudek's story is the story of a disposable pawn. And there's lots of those under Trump. They just used him and then they disposed of him. The White House, presented with extensive questions for this article, sent a one-paragraph statement disparaging ProPublica and Dudek. ProPublica's story, White House spokesperson Davis Ingle said, quote, is largely based around the comments of a disgruntled former employee who openly admitted to leaking to the media, manipulating his colleagues, and repeatedly telling lies from his official position. On his last day as acting commissioner, I don't have it handy here, but I feel like compelled to go back. His last day as acting commissioner, Leland Dudek showered praise upon President Trump in an op-ed and touted the real results of the Social Security Administration. But now that he's bitter about being out of a job, he's singing a different tune. Dudek said the administration asked him to write the op-ed and then vetted it. Referring to the litany of extravagant praise the cabinet secretaries lavished on Trump recently, he said, you saw the cabinet meeting. Bisignano, the Social Security Commissioner, comes to the role with a very different professional background than Dudek. Although, like Dudek, he has working class roots, in this case in Brooklyn. Until this job, Bisignano, 66, spent his career in the private sector. He was a top executive in operations and technology at massive banks like Citigroup and JP Morgan Chase, and went on to become CEO of the payment processor Fiserv. I don't think I know it, but I'm sure it's there. Yet, like DOGE, he appears to have embraced the appearance of efficiency rather than efficiency itself. He's repeatedly told staff that Social Security should be run more like Amazon, with AI handling more customer interactions. Oh no, please. But disability claims are more complicated than ordering toothpaste, according to SSA officials and experts, and Social Security's customer base is older and more likely to have an intellectual disability, I guess you could put it that way, than the average Amazon Prime member. I don't know if that's even true, but okay. Bisignano was also fixated on how much time it takes to reach an agent on the SSA's 800 number. In a July press release, he claimed that the average was down to 6 minutes, an 80% reduction from 2024. He achieved this in part by reassigning 1,000 field office employees to phone duty. That means initial calls are getting answered faster, but there are significantly fewer staff members available to handle complex in-person cases. And reaching an agent turns out to mean speaking to a human being or an AI bot. Internal SSA statistics obtained by ProPublica reveal that Bisignano's estimate treats cases in which beneficiaries interact with a chatbot and opt for a callback as 0-minute waits, skewing the average. If you actually stay on the line, USA Today has found it often takes over an hour to reach a live representative. In its statement, the SSA reiterated that call wait times have dramatically improved and that using technology on our national 800 number has enabled 90% of calls handled to be served via automated self-service options or convenient callbacks. Even the latest phone fraud policy feels like a rerun from DOGE's earlier season. In late July, Bisignano's team quietly posted a document to the Office of Management and Budget website stating that 3.4 million more people would have to go into field offices to verify their identities instead of being able to do so by phone starting August 18th. Days later, the SSA announced that this was actually optional. The DOGE era may officially be over at the agency, but the approach, it seems, is the same. As one SSA official put it, Bisignano is, quote, doing all the same fundamentally inefficient things more efficiently. Okay, I believe that's the end there. So I think what we're trying to say is he's doing his inefficiency more efficiently. That is to say, he's added more inefficiency to the system as opposed to, well, he's taking the things that used to be done inefficiently and doing them efficiently. That would actually be a good thing. Well, it's confusing times. And yeah, even more, all the more so because now we're supposed to view the guy who looked like the ultimate bumbling idiot opportunist was actually putting on an act at being a bumbling idiot opportunist to slow walk the destruction of Social Security Administration. And I just not sure if I buy it, but it's close enough to the line and interesting enough an idea that I thought I might share it with you on a day like today. Okay, I've got another story, I think a shorter story. I don't think I can fit it in before the break, but something I want to put on the record. Another guy to keep an eye on, and we'll give it a shot at starting it out. It's from the TexasMonthly.com. Behold, the 2025 Texas legislative session's cockroach. Okay, he accomplished nothing, but he sure did post through it. This is Allegra Hobbs, Christopher Hooks, Forrest Wilder, and Robert Downen together on a byline from a piece from July. Again, I guess this is sort of like the Texas legislature's worst for the 2025 session. It goes like this. A Gop chief of staff damned Representative Brian Harrison with the faintest possible praise when he told us that the Midlothian Republican would be, quote, good for Congress. Not unlike the alleged saying that was popular among members of the House some years ago, that a member of the House who won a seat in the Senate, what was it, raised the average IQ of both houses by doing so. I thought that was somewhat interesting. And I guess they feel like that they have the same thing going on over there in the Texas state legislature. All right. Where were we with this? Yes. There's a certain type of lawmaker, like Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Republican Congressman Jake Ellizzi, who turns a short, unproductive Texas House stint into a ticket to D.C. In the state legislature, being useless is cause for embarrassment. In Congress, it can be the foundation of a lengthy career. Ooh, ouch. Wow. Well, I guess they didn't make much of Jasmine Crockett down in Texas Monthly. But did I pronounce the other guy's name right? Jake Ellizzi. I might have said Ellizzi or something like that. But at any rate, him I never heard of. Jasmine Crockett, well, I don't know. We're kind of enjoying having Jasmine Crockett in Congress. But it is what it is. That's what they said. And we'll go with it for the moment. Harrison, the guy we're talking about, Brian Harrison. Harrison's last big job was as a Trump administration bureaucrat. What kind of bureaucrat and what sort of work did he do? Well, we'll explore that after we come back from this brief break in just 2 minutes.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, so when we left off, we were just about to reveal, but the break interceded, reveal what kind of bureaucrat it was that Brian Harrison actually was in the Trump administration. He used to brag, it says here, that he worked closely with Dr. Anthony Fauci and the team that accelerated COVID vaccine production. This is not promising material for a Republican congressional campaign. So Harrison dedicated his session to waging a futile war against Speaker Burrows from his right flank. He passed no bills and made about as many friends, but he forged something rare and inspiring in the House: bipartisan consensus. That is, most everyone agreed that Brian Harrison is unbearable. All right. A little bit of Ted Cruz, from Texas as well. As such, he is the successor to former state representatives Jonathan Stickland and Brian Slayton, past winners of our honorary title of cockroach, an old ledge term for a figure who mucks up lawmaking the same way vermin sully a kitchen. Even compared with the antics of his bomb-throwing predecessors, Harrison's behavior was uniquely tailored to the X-feeds of the Texas Gop's most conspiratorial far-right voters. Oh my. While his colleagues debated legislation, Harrison often paced the chamber's outer ring, chatting on his cell phone. During a hearing on one of his bills, he was excoriated by a fellow conservative who accused him of scrolling on his phone as other lawmakers asked him questions. He tweeted or retweeted more than 3,500 times during the 140-day session and made regular appearances on Steve Bannon's show to claim that the House was secretly controlled by Democrats somehow. He is an insufferable combination of hair gel, studio makeup, and narcissism, one Texas Gop executive committee member said. Wow. That Harrison accomplished nothing stands in contrast to his main charge that the House was too lazy. Early in the session, he attempted to force lawmakers to work on President's Day, claiming that the Texas Constitution prohibited 3-day weekends. Parenthetically, it says here, if having a cold one by the grill on a Monday is unconstitutional, call us Santa Ana. Okay, hardy har. But he made little of his weekdays, too, favoring stunts over legislating, going undercover at what he described as a transgenderism conference, and leaving the Abbott-appointed chair of a state agency, a black woman, in tears after grilling her on diversity hiring practices. The loneliest point in Harrison's session came when he tried to unseat Burrows by forcing a mid-session recall vote. I'm not here to fight for Brian Harrison's interests, Harrison said, drawing mocking laughter from his colleagues. Just one member voted with him. Even Arlington Representative Tony Tinderholt, once the king of the solitary right-wing stand, condemned the effort. Representative Harrison stood for himself. With enemies like Brian, Burrows must have thought, who needs friends? Interesting profile. I read about it because on Blue Sky, on September 10th, I had seen this circulated by Robert Downen. Robert Downen, can I bring up the profile here? Is a Texas Monthly writer focused on the far right, Christian nationalism, and the billionaires funding them. You get the idea? And he picked this one up and tweeted along, or posted on Blue Sky along with it, this note: lost in the Texas A&M news, which we've discussed a couple times, is that this entire crusade, or the entire crusade, is the product of a former Labradoodle breeder turned state representative, and that's Harrison, whose stunts and grandstanding are so insufferably transparent that even his Republican colleagues despise him. Meet Brian Harrison, winner of this Texas Monthly's 2025 Cockroach Award. Okay, comes to us from Labradoodle world. I think everyone loves Labradoodles, but all right, well, that's not enough to save him. Just thought I'd put him on record if one day he turns up in Congress. Apparently, that's a thing that happens down there in Texas, and as they are redistricting now, they might cut out a district for him and rid themselves of this annoying menace. Okay, so now you know who he is. Keep an eye out. All right, well, with about 20 minutes or so left in today's show, I got some other things to catch up on. There's still a million long-form things that I wanted to read and share with you, but there's only so much you can fit in one show. And we'll have another day off next week anyway, and perhaps we can get to work on recording some of those things for next week. In the meantime, something else that I wanted to bring you up to date on that might become an issue as things develop. We heard not that long ago, a week or so ago, maybe I guess toward the beginning of the month, that the Bureau of Labor Statistics was rather, I think, inexplicably delaying its jobs report, the first one due out since they fired the previous BLS chief and installed a new Trumpian choice. That new Trumpian choice now involved in the delay of a second important report, not a jobs report, but an annual report that I guess was coming due at this time. So I don't know. Maybe all the delay isn't this person's fault. But Bloomberg News reports under the headline of BLS delays the 2024 Consumer Expenditures Data Report with no explanation offered. Of course, this happened just at the end of last week. The Bureau of Labor Statistics postponed a release of an annual report on consumer expenditures. That's not important, right? That was, I guess, due out, and adding to the questions about the agency's operations following President Donald Trump's firing of its chief. Continuing on down, we've got to scroll down a little ways here. The announcement posted late Friday on the BLS website didn't provide any explanation for the change. We will update users when more information is available, the announcement said. That's not much. Erica McIntyre, was removed by Trump as commissioner of the BLS last month after her agency reported weak jobs growth in July. Well, because there was weak job growth in July and substantial downward revisions the 2 prior months. The move has raised questions about the reliability of key U.S. economic data and potential politicization of what had been a rigorously nonpartisan agency. Since McIntyre's dismissal, the BLS has revised jobs data further, prompting more criticism from the White House, which called the preliminary benchmark revisions released on September 9th another blunder in the lengthy history of inaccuracies and incompetence at BLS. Economists and statisticians say that monthly payrolls revisions are routine because the BLS continues to collect additional information from businesses that take longer to respond to the survey. Revisions ultimately make the data more accurate. The agency has long struggled with tight budgets and staffing constraints, both of which predate Trump, but which have grown more acute in his second term. So just putting it out there that is happening, and they still haven't, I guess, gotten BLS under what they consider to be control. We will add this news from the New Republic, which actually has been hanging around since the beginning of September 5th, which was a little closer to the date on which they made this switch, as I recall. Trump's BLS pick posted some, you'll never believe it, truly disturbing things on social media. It is the new guy, E.J. Antoni. Is that how he pronounces his last name? Antoni. E.J. Antoni's now deleted social media account was rife with hateful posts. It's so hard to believe. President Donald Trump's pick to lead the Bureau of Labor Statistics had a since-deleted social media account where he made lewd comments about Kamala Harris and, of course, bashed women and gay people, which at this point is just par for the course, but you should note it with disapproval as usual, and spread far-right conspiracy theories. I can't believe it. Gee, no wonder the president picked him. That's a little bit of editorializing from your writer on this piece, Edith Olmsted, but sounds justified. E.J. Antoni, the MAGA rioter, who Trump tapped to replace Erica McIntyre, ran an X account under different usernames and display names to air his right-wing grievances. CNN's K-File reported on Friday. He loves tracking that stuff down. When the account was first created in 2015, the username was simply his full name, Erwin John Antoni. He later changed his display name to Dr. Erwin J. Antoni III, around the time that he received his PhD in 2020. Now that's fair, isn't it? After that, the user frequently identified himself as an economist, and other accounts also identified him as one too, just by way of establishing him that I guess this is him. The account posted the specific phrase, quote, "You called down the thunder, now reap the whirlwind," 20 times, which, as it happens, also appeared on Antoni's professional account, Real E.J. Antoni, whatever it may be. The account had previously been linked to Antoni by Wired. This is just all by way of linking these things, which, he won't do you the courtesy of admitting that this is really him. So this is how they put it all together. Using the account, Antoni reportedly published a number of gross attacks against female politicians and political figures. While the posts are grotesque, they generally aligned with positions the president has expressed. Well, of course. In October of 2018, Antoni referred to Christine Blasey Ford, who had accused Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault, as, quote, Miss Piggy, which is actually something that Trump used to criticize one of the, Miss Universe pageant winners while he still owned that thing. Anyway, that was all done just one day after Trump mocked her, Christine Blasey Ford, and mocked her testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Antoni posted at least 5 times suggesting that former presidential candidate Kamala Harris had used sexual favors to advance her career. You can't run a race on your knees, wahaha, he wrote in December of 2019, responding to a picture of a Harris campaign poster that had been defaced. Trump later shared similar comments about Harris during the 2024 presidential race. Antoni accused former President Joe Biden, former FBI Director James Comey, and economist Paul Krugman of being pedophiles, because why not? He also took aim at members of the Squad, a group of female Democratic lawmakers whom Trump has also repeatedly criticized, but the president's barbs have tended to lean more racist than sexist. Sexism was a common theme for Antoni, who wrote and shared a number of posts explaining just how much he hates women. Feminism is that belief by which women are liberated from false slavery to men in order to become true slaves to corporations. Yeah, he's very worried about women's slavery, I'm sure. He wrote that in February of 2020. He's dabbled in gay bashing, writing in March 2020, there is only one sexual orientation and everything else is a disorientation. And he wrote several posts targeting CNN anchor Anderson Cooper and former CNN anchor Don Lemon. Wired previously reported that Antoni's account had published far-right positions like conspiracy theories about the 2020 election, COVID-19, and Jeffrey Epstein. Just in case you were wondering, K-File reported that he also shared conspiracy theories about the 2016 presidential election, criticized abortion, and engaged with QAnon and other far-right accounts. Now, that's it for the summary piece here in TNR. Just wanted to put it on the record now that he'll be back in the news as everybody returns to work on this week, and noting that yet another BLS report is late. I don't know how much attention they'll pay to this one, but I assume there's going to be another one due anytime now. And of course, we're counting down toward the end of the month, which brings us to the next jobs report. We'll see whether he gets that one out on time and whether, wink, wink, it shows tremendous improvement for the Trump administration. While I'm in the New Republic archives, giving you profiles of people we think are kind of dirty, I thought I might add this one. This one's been sitting in Instapaper for a while. I just didn't really recall this about Caroline Leavitt. Did you know about Caroline Leavitt's failed congressional bid at all? And that it was coming back to bite her, as it turns out. Creditors are hunting down the White House press secretary. I wonder if they can figure out where to find her. This is an interesting little bit. Also, again, from TNR, Ellie Quinlan Hoteling? I don't know how you pronounce this. I think we've run into the name before. Houghthaling. Hoteling, maybe? Something like that. My apologies. Let's get to the substance of it. Debt creditors are on the prowl for federal officials. Did you know this? White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt owes $326,370.50 in the aftermath of her failed 2022 congressional campaign, according to a new disclosure filed with the Federal Election Commission. At least it was a new disclosure when it was filed back when this story was written, July 29th. We haven't discussed it this whole time. Her campaign committee, Caroline for Congress, didn't raise any money during April, May, or June of this year, which is probably a good thing. Failing to pay off, though, a dime of her mountainous debt, according to the disclosure. The majority of the debt is the result of accepting illegal campaign contributions. That's a problem in itself. That exceeded federal limits, the bulk of which she has not yet returned, reported Open Secrets. And honestly, who thinks she'd be prosecuted under federal law at this point for that anyway? The campaign committee reported in June that it had spent the illicit funds a long time ago and currently had no cash on hand. So, That's the way things go with bribes, Some of the individuals owed refunds include former New Hampshire Governor Craig Benson, as well as the late New Hampshire Senate Majority Leader Robert Clegg Jr. Caroline for Congress also owes more than $46,000 to Missouri-based consultant Axiom Strategies, $41,000 to Missouri-based polling firm Remington Research Group, and nearly $13,000 to Washington-based fundraising firm Fundraising Incorporated. But of course, they can just raise the funds to pay themselves back, I guess. Oh well. Anyway, other donors did scrape by before the committee stopped dishing out refunds. They conveniently included Levitt's parents, according to Notice, Notus, of course. The committee is currently under audit by the FEC. The excessive donations went unreported for years, but in January, the group amended 17 prior campaign finance reports, each one it had ever made, to account for the unlawful discrepancy, Notice reported at the time. An unidentified source close to Levitt told Open Secrets that Levitt doesn't personally owe anyone money and underscored that Caroline for Congress is, quote, working with the FEC through the audit, and that process is ongoing, hence the outstanding debt. And they enclose that in scare quotes, debt. And Citizens United, a Democratic-aligned PAC, sued Caroline for Congress over the illegal donations in November of 2022. But little has changed since then, except the president. The FEC has lacked the minimum 4 commissioners necessary to investigate or initiate investigation since May. Donald Trump has the sole authority to nominate commissioners, who must then be confirmed by the Senate. But so far, the president has not nominated a single individual to the regulatory agency, despite recommendations from congressional leaders. Cases like this send a clear message. If you break campaign finance laws, nothing will happen to you. And Citizens United President Tiffany Muller told Open Secrets, it's open season for corrupt leaders who want to game the system and get away with it. And I know someone who wants to game the system and get away with it, Caroline Levitt. And I guess she's been able to do it. I just thought I'd put that on the record. Something we really haven't discussed to this point. And we got a few minutes left. Maybe we can close things out with another piece I've been holding on to. Let me see if I can't find the place and get it from ballsandstrikes.org. Balls and Strikes, in this case, written by Madiba K. Denny, a September 19th piece, much more recent, from Friday, that I thought I should get on the record as long as I got a few minutes. Federal judge strikes Trump defamation lawsuit for being too annoying to read. This is the wackadoodle suit just recently filed by Trump against the New York Times, another shakedown looking for X billions of dollars because of damage to his brand. You remember this one? And it got thrown out. By the way, he was asked about the lawsuit a few hours after it was thrown out, and he said, I'm winning. It's doing great. And of course, it has been dismissed. Lawsuits rarely get tossed, they mention, under Rule 8 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. But then again, lawsuits rarely spend 85 meandering pages talking about things like the plaintiff's singular brilliance. So now into the details of this piece of crap lawsuit. On Friday, September 19th, a federal district judge in Florida struck President Donald Trump's complaint in his $15 billion defamation lawsuit against the New York Times, 4 Times reporters, and what I like to call Random Penguin House, or what I like to call Water Random Penguin House. Water. They told me I could put water in anything. Describing the complaint as, quote, decidedly improper and impermissible. Under Rule 8 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, a complaint is supposed to include, quote, a short and plain statement alleging enough facts that, if true, could warrant legal relief. The complaint Trump filed last Monday, by contrast, is 85 pages long, and that's not a problem by itself, but it reads more like an anthology of his Truth Social posts with slightly better punctuation. Most complaints filed in federal courtrooms do not get tossed under Rule 8, but most complaints in federal courtrooms do not spend dozens of pages recounting, as Trump's does, the plaintiff's, quote, singular brilliance and, quote, history-making media appearances in programs like Fallen Champ, The Untold Story of Mike Tyson. Yeah, it's not even like news appearances on TV. Just anything. Movies, the like. It's crazy. Trump's complaint is also crowded with boasts about his purported magnificence. For example, quote, President Trump secured the greatest personal and political achievement in American history, unquote. And snipes about legacy media's anti-Trump bias. For example, quote, defendants baselessly hate President Trump in a deranged way, unquote. Friday's order, in turn, is full of the judge's unmasked exhaustion. As every lawyer knows, or is presumed to know, a complaint is not a public forum for vituperation and invective, wrote Stephen Merriday, a judge, in fact, the judge, but a judge appointed by President George H.W. Bush in 1992. This complaint stands unmistakably and inexcusably athwart the requirements of Rule 8. Merriday gave Trump 28 days to amend the complaint and come back with something less ridiculous and not exceeding 40 pages. This action will continue, and will end in accord with the rules of procedure and in a professional and dignified manner, he wrote. This is probably not the warm reception Trump expected when he decided to file in the Tampa division of the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Florida, instead of, say, Washington, D.C., where he lives, or New York, where the Times is based. Trump's complaint says that he chose to do so because Trump is a citizen of Florida. The defendants sell their published writing in Florida, and Floridians access and read their work. But there is a simpler explanation. Forum shopping. The practice of choosing where to file a lawsuit in order to get a more favorable outcome. The knowledge that some judges are more sympathetic to particular causes than others is why, for example, every unwashed misogynist who sees a woman making decisions about her own body files a complaint about it in Amarillo, Texas, where they're all but guaranteed to get their case before Judge Matt Kaczmarek. And Trump had good reason to be optimistic here, too. 2/3 of the Tampa Division judges are Republican appointees, and half were appointed by Trump himself. The Trump judge who recently gave an award to a student for arguing that the Constitution only applies to white people, and the Trump judge who struck down the mask mandate on planes during the height of the pandemic, both sit in Tampa. Forum shopping undermines the integrity of the legal system, such as it exists, because litigants go out of their way, sometimes literally, to secure a friendly decision maker. The federal judiciary's policymaking body came up with new rules last year in order to curb the practice, but quickly backed off after frequently shopped for judges caught an attitude. Litigants like Trump are thus free to continue trying to game the system in this manner. Trump's lawsuit against the Times is a reminder to all the forum shoppers out there, though, that they don't always get what they pay for. He did get a federal judge in Florida appointed by a Republican president, but it looks like he got one with some respect for himself and the federal judiciary, or who, at the very least, doesn't think odes to, quote, the world-renowned Trump brand that consumers have long associated with excellence, luxury, and success belongs in legal filings. Hey, nobody does. And now, with barely any time left at all here, but just a few minutes to kill, just to fill things out here, I wanted to bring you up to date on the military situation in Europe, just to let you know that there's been incursions in a third NATO country, along with the rest of them. Or are we talking about a NATO country here or not? All right. It's Estonia, which I'm now looking up. Is that actually, it's hard to remember whether or not he is. Yeah, okay. Estonia, been a member, according to the AI slop, a member of NATO since March 29th, 2004. So Russian incursions into Estonia, just making things worse. We had noted Romania and Poland. So we're now up to 3. Estonia says 3 Russian fighter jets entered its airspace in a, quote, brazen incursion. This reported by the AP. on September 19th. Geir Molson and Andrew Wilkes get the byline in this one, and we just have a minute or two to give you a taste for it, but so that I put it on the record and use the last couple minutes to get that out there in case we have to discuss it by the time we get back tomorrow. Estonia summoned a Russian diplomat to protest after 3 Russian fighter aircraft entered its airspace without permission on Friday and stayed there for 12 minutes, the foreign ministry said. It happened just over a week after NATO planes downed Russian drones over Poland and heightened fears that the war in Ukraine could spill over. Foreign Minister Margus Chakna is my best guess at the pronunciation of them, said Russia violated Estonian airspace 4 times this year, but today's incursion, that is to say Friday's, involving 3 fighter aircraft entering our airspace is unprecedentedly brazen. Estonian Defense Minister Hanno Pevkur, I should have known better than getting into a story about Estonia in the last few minutes, also said the government had decided to start consultations among the allies under NATO's Article 4. Not the famous Article 5, but Article 4, he wrote on X, after Russian jets, quote, violated our airspace yet again. I think that's really about all the time we have for this in today's pre-recorded episode, just to keep you company on Tuesday as I'm away from the microphone. We'll be back live tomorrow with Greg Dworkin with us, presumably, unless home improvement gets in the way. And as it turns out, I guess we got to do a shout out. At least some of the folks working on Greg's house have been listening to the show while working. And Greg tells me when he heard that the drilling was then audible on Greg's side, I didn't hear it. So you haven't interrupted anything there, sir, but very courteously stopped long enough for Greg to be able to finish the show on Monday. So that's really something. Our audience is expanding, and that's always good news, even if Russian incursions into Estonian airspace really isn't. By the way, just because we have the time as we play ourselves out of today's show, Article 4 of the NATO treaty, the shortest of NATO's 14 articles, and it states that the parties will consult together whenever, in the opinion of any one of them, the territorial integrity, political independence, or security of any of the parties is threatened. Can I personally? No, I guess I got to get somebody else. Can another party invoke that as with respect to what's happening in the United States or not? Not really sure. Anyway, President Donald Trump told reporters he'll soon be briefed by aides on the incursion. I don't love it, he said. I don't like when that happens. It could be big trouble, but I'll let you know later.
Radio.com.
Thanks a lot.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
So it's basically the equivalent of, we'll see what happens, Article 4. I have an Article 2 that says I can do whatever I want. The Europeans are rattled about it, though, and we'll see. We'll see what happens. I guess we'll have to keep an eye on these things, just so you know, and we'll be back tomorrow. Stay tuned next for Justice Putnam with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Next.